They lied about me in that house for years, twisted my name, mocked my silence, and called it family. But the night I heard my own sister whisper, "Make sure Abigail never rises above me," something inside me cracked so loud I swear the walls heard it. I walked away back then quiet, wounded, and alone believing distance could protect me. I was wrong. Because betrayal doesn't fade, it waits. And the night I returned to that table, every old wound followed me through the door, right before the Admiral stood up and said one word that ruined their perfect little story forever. I left Portsmouth under a fading strip of autumn light, the kind that settles low over the water and turns the ocean into a dull sheet of silver. Driving north felt strangely like slipping back into a version of myself I thought I'd shed years ago. The road into York County hadn't changed at all. Pines still crowded the shoulders, old wooden houses still leaned toward the wind, the same cracked signs still guarded the bends in the road. It was as if time here refused to move, even while I had been forced to. The closer I got, the heavier the memories felt. Not the warm kind, never those, but the tight, the quiet ones that settled around my ribs when I was younger. Still, I didn't return out of longing. I came back because Lydia had called, abrupt and unquestioning, telling me to be home on Saturday because the family needed to be all together. She didn't ask if I could come. She demanded it, as she always did, as if my life simply slotted in where she preferred. When I pulled into the driveway, I stayed behind the wheel for a breath longer than necessary. The porch light flickered before the door opened. My father greeted me with a smile that looked borrowed. My mother stepped aside wordlessly, her eyes dropping the moment mine rose to meet hers. That old hush lived in the house, the one that tried to pass for calm but carried judgment like a second skin. Lydia moved into the room as if she'd been waiting for a cue, polished and composed. "Tonight is important. Just make sure you behave." The words were gentle enough, but the implication struck like a tap to an old bruise. Something tightened low in my stomach. The first warning that whatever this night held, it wouldn't be simple. I didn't yet understand that the real story hadn't even begun. The moment I stepped farther into the house, the atmosphere felt staged, tightened, almost rehearsed. This wasn't the casual, slightly messy home I remembered. Someone had gone over every inch with a perfectionist's hand. A brand-new tablecloth clung spotless and stiff to the dining table. 2 bottles of wine, labels glossy. The kind no one in this house ever bought sat open on the counter, and on the cabinet near the hallway, propped at an angle impossible to miss, stood a framed photograph of a man in full naval dress uniform. The kind of picture meant to signal importance before the man himself ever walked in. Nothing about it matched a simple family dinner. Lydia glided into the kitchen, her perfume hitting me first heavy, bold, so strong it smothered the scent of roasting chicken. She looked me over from head to toe with the precision of someone inspecting a prop, not a person. Her expression didn't say she was glad I came. It said she was deciding whether I fit whatever image she needed tonight. "Admiral Jonathan Hale will be here," she said, sounding casual in a way that was too practiced to be real. I paused mid-step, thrown off. "Admiral." She gave a little shrug that carried all the superiority she'd cultivated over the years. "He's mentoring Mark. Tonight matters for him, and for us." In that moment, the evening snapped into focus. This wasn't a family gathering at all. It was Lydia's carefully crafted showcase, a night arranged to elevate her fiancé and, in turn, herself. And I was simply an inconvenient variable she had no choice but to include. Before I could respond, Aunt Melinda wandered in, already tipsy, cheeks warm from wine she'd clearly sampled too early. She looked between us and laughed. "Remember when Abigail disappeared for almost a year? What a mess that was." Lydia's smile froze, then vanished. She cut in sharply, voice clipped enough to draw a line in the air. No need to drag up the past. Not tonight. Her reaction said everything. There were things buried in that past she couldn't afford to let surface. Things she was terrified I might bring with me. The chicken kept roasting. The wine breathed. The photo gleamed. And beneath it all, something tense and electric settled like a storm deciding where to strike. The dinner hadn't even started, but the first blow had already been thrown. By the time we all sat down, The room had folded itself into a stilted politeness. Mark sat tall beside Lydia, spine straight, chin lifted, the picture of a young officer trying too hard to embody discipline. I took a seat among relatives who greeted me with smiles too tight to be genuine. The questions began almost immediately. Still working that office job? What do you even do there? Must get dull. Their words cut with the same careless precision they always had. I answered with a polite smile, letting their assumptions settle where they were most comfortable far from the truth. Then someone mentioned the old rumor, the one that had driven me from this house for months. No softness, no sensitivity, just tossed out like an anecdote for entertainment. Across the table, Lydia let out a small laugh, sweet on the surface and razor-sharp underneath. She's always been a little too sensitive. Don't pay it any mind. Mark? He looked at me differently, then curious, judgmental, trying to understand how someone like me fit into Lydia's story. Or if I fit at all. The room tightened. The space around me shrank. From the kitchen doorway, I heard Lydia whisper to our mother, low and urgent, "Just tonight. Don't let her ruin this." Her words slid into place like a final puzzle piece. They didn't see me as part of the evening. They saw me as a risk. But what they didn't understand was simple. The danger wasn't my presence. It was their fear of what the truth might expose, truth they had spent years pretending wasn't there. Dinner began with the kind of strained cheerfulness that always made my skin tighten. Lydia had placed me near the end of the table, far enough away that I wouldn't distract from whatever polished narrative she intended to present with Mark. From where I sat, I could see the way she angled herself toward him, curating every expression as if the whole room were her stage. Forks scraped softly against plates, and for a moment it almost felt civil until the conversation shifted. It always shifted. One relative leaned forward, voice loud enough to rise above the clatter. "Abigail, what do you actually do? Look at other people's papers all day." The table erupted in laughter, the kind that echoed more than it amused. Lydia tilted her head, swirling wine in her glass with a practiced elegance. She likes to make things sound complicated. Truth is, none of it really matters. There it was, the familiar attempt to shrink me, not subtle, not gentle, and timed perfectly for maximum effect. Her words weren't just a dismissal, they were a reminder to everyone at the table of the role she preferred me to play. Mark joined in, leaning back with the confidence of someone who'd never been questioned in his life. "Do you even understand Navy operations? Or is it all theory to you?" The smirk on his face made the comment sting more than the words themselves. I held his gaze and answered only, "You'd be surprised by what I understand. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to." Lydia's eyes flickered with irritation. She hated when I refused to give her the reaction she wanted. And then the evening shifted again. The front door opened, and Admiral Hale stepped inside. No one had prepared for how his presence would swallow the room whole. Conversations died mid-sentence. Chairs scraped as my parents scrambled to stand, their sudden reverence almost comical after the ease with which they'd mocked me moments earlier. Lydia practically flew toward him, posture sharp, voice bright, ready to play hostess. But as the Admiral's gaze traveled around the table, it lingered on me for a beat too long, long enough for something unspoken to pass between us. Not recognition, not exactly. More like the first flicker of memory reaching for clarity. Lydia rushed to fill the space. "This is my sister, Abigail. She does some sort of research." A quick dismissal, a deflection meant to sever the connection before it formed, but her interruption had the opposite effect. The Admiral's attention sharpened, turning fully toward me, and for the first time that night, I felt the balance of the room tilt. The Admiral took his seat, and Lydia immediately began her performance, directing the conversation toward Mark, shaping the evening into the introduction she envisioned. But the Admiral wasn't listening to her. His posture shifted gradually toward me, and then the question came steady, deliberate, cutting straight through the noise. "Ms. Turner, what's your view on the tensions up in the Northern Passage? Have you been following the situation?" The room went still. Lydia's lips curled into a smug smile, convinced she had set me up to fail. Mark folded his arms, waiting for me to stumble. I could feel the expectation hovering, thick as humidity before a storm. I answered calmly, the way I'd been trained to handle anything that brushed against classified territory. I can't discuss specifics, but based on movement patterns over the past 3 years, the issue isn't the disputed zone, it's the support line behind it. Silence. Heavy and sudden. The Admiral lifted his head, studying me as though dusting off a memory he hadn't opened in years. He set his glass down slowly, thoughtfully. Behind him, a young officer narrowed his eyes at me, leaning closer to whisper something to the Admiral. And though he spoke quietly, the words carried enough for me to hear. "Sir, is she Abigail Turner?" From the 214B review. Lydia froze, her glass suspended midair. Mark stared like I'd spoken in another language. The Admiral's eyes widened just slightly, though recognition finding its target. "I've read your work before." My pulse kicked hard in my chest. I kept my expression neutral. But inside, something long buried stirred. Lydia lunged into the silence, her voice shrill with panic. "She doesn't understand military matters. Don't pay attention to her. She only knows theory." Her desperation rang louder than her words. The Admiral's expression cooled toward her, then settled firmly back on me. And with that shift, everything else in the room began to unravel. He asked me the question that changed the temperature of the evening entirely. "Ms. Turner, did you contribute to the North Passage analysis 3 years ago?" I didn't speak. I didn't nod. I didn't confirm or deny, but my silence was enough. Breath stalled across the table. Every pair of eyes fixed on me. And for the first time in years, I felt the truth rising, not because I pushed it forward, but because someone in power finally recognized it. The room shrank the moment the Admiral's attention shifted away from Lydia's performance and landed squarely on me. It wasn't a fleeting glance, there was recognition building behind his eyes, the kind that made Lydia tense beside him. I could practically feel her panic rising like heat from the table. I drew in a breath, ready to divert the conversation, but Lydia cut in before I could speak. Her voice was tight, higher than usual, trembling at the edges. "Admiral, she's confused. She didn't do anything significant. Trust me." That was the first time I had seen fear break through her polished exterior. She wasn't afraid for me. She was afraid of what he might remember. Admiral Hale didn't look at her. He turned slightly to his aide. "Bring me the file list from the North Passage analysis later." The words struck the table with a force Lydia couldn't hide from. Mark leaned back, the arrogance draining from his expression. My father tried to laugh, but the sound cracked in the middle. "Surely this is some mistake." Admiral Hale didn't blink. "There aren't many Abigail Turners tied to Level 1 strategy documents." The air thickened, as if the room itself knew a reckoning was coming. Then Lydia snapped. She was suspended. She never wrote anything. Silence hit harder than her outburst. That lie had followed me for years. Hearing it aloud now made the room shift, as though every person finally realized its weight. Admiral Hale looked directly at her, his voice low but devastating. "Suspended interesting. I received an anonymous letter questioning the analyst who drafted the North Passage report. Only Lydia had known I wrote that draft. I reviewed the case," he added. "The accusations had no merit." And just like that, the ground under Lydia's carefully built world began to crumble. The tension stretched so tightly, it hummed. Admiral Hale was no longer searching. He had connected every thread. Lydia paled, turning wildly to my mother, as though she could pull her back from the edge. "Mom, say something, please." But my mother's eyes dropped, shame trembling through her shoulders. Then a relative whispered the line that shattered Lydia's last defense. "Weren't you the one who told us those things about Abigail?" Her chair scraped loudly as she jumped up. "No!" I only repeated what I heard. Admiral Hale tilted his head, study returning to his gaze. From where or from whom Lydia had no answer. He turned to me instead. Voice steady. "Miss Turner, why stay silent all these years?" I glanced around the table at the faces that never questioned a single lie. I didn't want an investigation tearing the family apart, and I knew no one would believe me. Their heads lowered, not in sympathy, but in guilt. Then the Admiral's aide stepped forward, touching his earpiece. "Sir, Confirmation the notes in your 2020 brief match her writing style? Lydia staggered. My mother's voice cracked. Abigail, it was you! Before I spoke! Lydia lunged at the Admiral in desperation. Please, don't let this affect Mark. But her panic exposed everything she tried to hide. The Admiral rose slowly, authority filling every corner of the room. Abigail Turner, I'd like to stand when I address someone of your rank. A fork hit the floor, and the entire house went silent. The air in the room felt thick enough to hold in my hands. Admiral Hale rose from his chair with a slow, deliberate authority that pulled every gaze toward him. The scrape of the chair legs echoed like a command. Even Lydia, always so eager to be the center of attention, froze as though someone had cut the lights on her stage. He adjusted the front of his uniform and turned fully toward me. The look in his eyes wasn't anger or confusion. It was recognition deep, certain, and carrying a weight I had never received in this house. He nodded once. Ma'am? The single word sliced through the room. One word yet, it shattered every story Lydia had ever spun about me. My mother's wine glass slipped from her hand. Mark stiffened, swallowing hard. Lydia didn't blink, didn't breathe. Stunned into absolute stillness, Admiral Hale's voice followed, firm and clear. Ms. Turner, your strategic analysis for the North Passage guided mission movement and protected lives under my command. The silence tightened as he bowed his head slightly, the gesture landing with more force than any argument I could have made. My team and I owe you a debt. And tonight, he said, letting his eyes shift toward Lydia, that deserves to be acknowledged. Then he faced Mark. Respect is earned by action, not noise. Lydia sank into her chair, defeated. I remained quiet. The truth had finally spoken for me. After the Admiral spoke that single word, the room seemed to split open. All the ease, all the polite small talk and careful performance evaporated, as if someone had pulled a curtain back and forced every hidden truth into the light. My father looked at me without the usual dismissal dulling his eyes. My mother clutched the edge of the table, shaking as though what she had witnessed simply didn't fit the version of me she'd chosen to believe for years. But it was Lydia who shattered first. Her voice quivered, thin and breaking. No, that's impossible. She's just Admiral Hale cut clean through her denial. If you have evidence to contradict what I've said, I'd like to hear it. She froze, lips parted but empty of words. The silence that followed held more weight than her excuses ever could. Then a relative broke it with a quiet question that sliced straight through Lydia's last defense. Weren't you the one who told us those things about Abigail back then? Lydia stumbled back, face draining to chalk. My mother raised a hand to her mouth, trembling. Lydia, what did you do? Cornered, Lydia collapsed into tears, not of remorse, but of exposure. I just didn't want her getting ahead of me. I sent the letter. I only wanted them to question her, so she wouldn't surpass me. Her confession dropped into the room like a final verdict. Admiral Hale inhaled slowly, disappointment etched into every line of his expression. Jealousy destroys integrity. In my world, integrity is everything. Mark rose abruptly, dragging a hand across his face, stunned and embarrassed. Then the Admiral looked at me. You never should have lost your position. You were harmed and stayed silent to protect them. I steadied my breath. I didn't want an investigation tearing the family apart. And I hoped they'd believe me someday. For the first time, every gaze turned toward me with respect instead of judgment. My mother choked out an apology. Abigail, I'm sorry. I believed what I shouldn't have, but the words reached me too late. It wasn't that I couldn't forgive. I simply couldn't hand them my trust again. I stepped out of the house the moment the apologies began bursting through the room scattered, frantic, and far too late. Their voices tangled behind me, each one trying to rewrite what they had allowed for years. But I didn't turn back. I didn't need to hear their regrets. I didn't need anyone reaching for me now. The cold Maine air met me first, sharp and salty against my skin, carrying the familiar scent of the sea. I'd left this house in pain once before, my heart bruised and hollow. But this time, as the door closed behind me, I felt only clarity, no bitterness, no longing, just the quiet certainty that I was finished carrying the weight they had put on me. I drove the long road back to Portsmouth, passing the same dark pines and winding curves of my childhood. But everything felt different now, lighter, steadier, as if the night itself was making room for me. I didn't expect forgiveness from them, and I no longer needed belonging from people who had never tried to offer it. When I finally parked outside my building, the phone buzzed softly in my pocket. An email from Admiral Jonathan Hale, subject for your work. One sentence waited inside. Your analysis saved lives. Thank you for your service. I stared at the words, letting them settle, not out of pride or validation, but because they confirmed something I had quietly known all along. I didn't need my family's approval to know my worth. All I ever needed was for the truth to stand on its own. And tonight, it finally did in a single word that cut through every lie they ever told. Ma'am.